folks, this is Emily. I'm here to talk to you this Monday more about the Prairie Pothole region, area where I live, area that models fairly strong up through 4C, area that I think is an important destination region if you are a person who, like me, is very concerned about biodiversity issues. Not because I think that if you don't get here, you're going to immediately die, which I know was some folks' takeaway from last week's video. If you're a person who cares about landscape restoration, who cares about making opportunities for other living things to continue to grow and thrive, who wants to think in the long view, if things go really bad, if it becomes more difficult for large mammals to survive on the landscape, what other forms of biodiversity can we preserve? Prairie Pothole region is the place where your work can have a lasting impact, and that's why I'm making this video series. So if you're thinking about coming here, if you're thinking about doing lasting biodiversity work with like serious longevity under like seriously rough conditions, here's what the Prairie Pothole region looks like. You can see here, Prairie Pothole region is gigantic. It extends way up into Canada, and it has kind of floppy margins depending on who you ask. The area that I'm interested in as like a particularly resilient destination is this lower arm of the Prairie Pothole region where we're reaching into Iowa, Minnesota, and South Dakota. It's not because everything's all foobar outside of this region in the projections, and because this is the highest conserved area through 4C in a region where the local wildlife and the local native plants are extremely resilient to extreme conditions, to hot, to cold, to being lit on fire, whatever. Prairie Pothole doesn't care. If you want to see what a healthy prairie pothole region looks like from the air, where they haven't like filled in all of the little holes, which is a big problem, this is a nice aerial view. You can see the potential for a landscape where you have this very fluid prairie marsh interface where many animals are able to access water at many points within their home range. Mentioned before, prairie pothole region is where ducks come from. And you know, they're all born here, they're hatched in the prairie pothole region. And you can see that they are recovered throughout your entire duck hunting season in Louisiana, in Mississippi, in Texas. We also produce waterfowl in this region that are hunted as far away as California and Maryland. So if you want ducks, you want to be part of the Prairie Pothole region. In our first video last week, introducing this region and its outlook, sharing a little bit about its culture, I got a lot of great questions from people, and I'm going to be responding to them over the next few weeks. I was able to pull together some information on the interest the state might have in your pants in these regions first. I had some folks asking me about LGBTQ plus rights. I had some people asking me about reproductive rights. Let's see what we can check out for this region. There's a lot of differentiation between the three states, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. Let's look into it. Here we've got a nice map from the Movement Advancement Project that tallies all kinds of policies related to LGBT plus rights. We can see that Minnesota is in green with high overall scores for rights for these federally protected groups. South Dakota's in red. In Iowa, we see a fair policy overall. I'd like to explain a little bit more about what we see here. In Minnesota, we do see, and you can click on this map, I'll have the link in the thing, a lot of quick facts and how they're breaking things down. They look at the laws around relationship and parental recognition, discrimination laws, religious exemption laws, and factors impacting youth. That's your big distinction when you start looking over at the difference between Iowa and Minnesota, is that in Minnesota, we see generally strong laws around sexual orientation and gender identity. In Iowa, there's a pretty good legal framework around sexual orientation, but not around gender identity. And in South Dakota, we see limited legal protection around both sets of frameworks. It's also important to look at impending legislation and stuff that's coming down the pipe. You can see here in the ACLU that this is important information. In Iowa, there is currently legislation being approved and moving down the pipeline to further impair the rights of trans people. Iowa really wants to get into your pants, and I think that's creepy. I prefer the relatively lawless Iowa of years ago, where I had to answer only to the EPA, which I'm happy to do. We see that there is also primarily anti-trans legislation attempting to move in Minnesota. It's unlikely, most people say, that it will advance there. In Iowa, it does seem likely that this legislation will advance and become law. So, again, to summarize, for people who identify based on sexual orientation on this sexual and gender spectrum as a member of a protected class, you have pretty good legal framework in Minnesota and Iowa. Iowa was one of the first states in the nation to recognize marriage equality. In South Dakota, we see less legislation moving down the pipeline, but that is because both of those categories of protected classes of people have really fairly restrictive moves. South Dakota wants in your pants really bad. Let's look at some other ways the government might want to get into your pants. Looking in Minnesota, Minnesota's polite. They're nice there. They're going to leave you alone. They're going to let you make decisions about your own body. They have recognized at the highest court level the right to privacy and health care between patients and doctors. In South Dakota, it's currently got extremely restrictive laws in place, unlikely to be overturned. In Iowa, abortion rights issues, medical issues are very serious. They're an area of serious social contention. There are many people here who are very sincerely concerned about the rights of unborn persons and when those rights come into place. The legislature is trying to push for a 6-week ban where abortion would be banned after 6 weeks. Right now, there's a 20-week ban on abortion. So abortion rights are restricted. I think that it is very likely that we'll remain somewhere in that place in Iowa. There is extreme social sensitivity on this topic. There is a lot of social debate over where the rights of the mother and the rights of the child intersect. I think it's worth noting that there is more medical awareness of the need for medical exemption in Iowa than I've heard in many other states where these issues are contested. If you want to be able to do a detailed click through on the laws, here you're going to want to look at the Center for Reproductive Rights map. You've got great detail on the laws. If you want to look at practical impacts about how it might affect you as a patient or a care provider, Planned Parenthood has what might be a more effective at a glance patient directed click through menu. I think is interesting about Iowa is that in many ways going to Iowa is like unlocking the magic of time travel. You can move 30 years into the past.
Yes. South Park did a thing about that way back in the day. Yes.
Appreciate
Yeah,
it.
the man who fell into ice and he couldn't make it in the modern world 3 years later, so he moved to Des Moines. That was his solution.
That's fantastic. But, I feel like there are many ways where you would think that that meant that Iowa was not a good place if you were aligned to these different groups.
Yeah.
And I can say I know many couples who are women raising children together.
Mhm.
I know many people who are very involved in Pride movement, many people who are involved in forming the LGBTQ plus community in Iowa going up into Minnesota, which is also very friendly to that community.
Right.
And I think it's worth knowing that this is a place where you can be welcome as a member of this community, that there are serious anti-trans legislation that's coming down the pipeline with popular support, thin margin. We're talking about like a 54% positive margin, but that is a margin of popular support. I think part of it is that Iowans met some gay people.
Yeah.
And they figured out that gay people are okay.
Right.
And many Iowans have not yet met any trans people. And they're worried that they want to get in your pants as much as the South Dakota government does. But I don't think that's true.
Right. It's my experience. I'm gonna tell a little story here, kind of off the beaten path. Emily and I once almost moved to Alabama. We considered moving to Alabama, and while I was there, I met someone who was a public school teacher, and she told me a story of when she first got to Alabama. She made the mistake of giving the kids homework that was due on Thursday, so they'd have to do it on Wednesday night. And the parents got very upset. She had no idea why. And the principal had to pull her aside and say, in this town, everyone goes to church on Wednesday night. You cannot assign homework that's due on Thursday because we have an understanding that in this town, everyone's going to be at the Baptist church on Wednesday night. And when I heard that story, it was surprising to me because, Alabama and Iowa, they might look the same on the map. They're both pretty red at this point. They're both rural states, but that's a million miles away from where I grew up culturally. The idea that, like there's a cultural monolith that you have to be a part of. We just don't have that here. We're very welcoming of a diversity of practice and opinions and ideas, and people just make their own little subgroups. And I think if you are part of the LGBTQ community or sympathetic or an ally, you would find your people, and it wouldn't be an issue that everyone is against you. It wouldn't be an issue that you're going to be standing out in some way.
I am concerned about protections and oppression of trans youth and of trans kids in school.
The legal
The
situation
legal
is
situation is
serious.
difficult.
I'm trying to describe the social situation.
I think there's a very fair distinction there. I think that we're in a position in Iowa where hopefully people will activate to defend the children of our community, because really that was a big part of what drove the push to marriage equality, is that people want to have as many children as possible in the community, and they want to take care of their children.
Yeah.
And they want to recognize the rights of families and children.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same situation is true in Iowa, in Minnesota.
Yep.
If you get up north of the border, I think that there's the same sort of cultural diversity in this Prairie Pothole region place.
Yes.
I think that you're more likely to run into a unique form of ignorant prejudice in this cultural region than a hateful prejudice, if that makes any sense.
Sure. I mean, there are people who just haven't met anyone like that.
I mean, like in my time in rural Iowa, I've been asked some exciting questions as a Jew. Like, do Jews drink coffee? We do. We do drink coffee. And, like it can be weird to be in these interactions with a person who's never met anyone like you before. But if you're able to be resilient against the fact that sometimes things are awkward and weird, it's an opportunity to actually have very positive human connection and help change people's perceptions for the better if you're a member of a minority group in this area.
Yeah. And I think, there are a lot of people for whom this is a practical issue, but there are a lot of people also who might be asking because it's sort of a stand-in for, the things that they really care about. Am I going to find like-minded people? Am I going to find a community of people who share my beliefs, share my values? It seems like everyone doesn't. But, if you just, you can't worry too much about the color on the political map. You will find your people here.
I would look at the density of hate crimes on the hate map from the Southern Poverty Law Center. And I think that many people are scared. If you get a lot of white people together, are they going to be committing hate crimes? Because in some places that's true. In some high density white populations, there's a lot of hate crime activity. I think it's worth noting that particularly in the Minnesota-Iowa corridor, you have an extremely low incidence of hate crime activity. They're very peaceful populations.
There are a few exceptions, but yeah.
It's true. There's some bad spots, and we should look at the hate map next time to help to identify where are there areas where there's more of a tendency towards hate, towards discrimination and violence. Those are really pinpoints in a sea of hot dishes.
Very nice.
On the reproductive rights issues, that's another serious situation where that impacts people on the ground. We've all seen reports in the national news about women who have had serious health impacts from a lack of medical exemptions around reproductive law.
Yes, and it seems like here in Iowa, there's not a big appetite for the no exceptions, doesn't matter what the doctor says. Like that doesn't seem to be on the agenda here.
I think there is a real concern about limiting abortion after the point of viability. I think that that's part of like the pro-natalist culture in the area, that if there's a viable fetus, if there's a person, a viable person, I think there are a lot of people who would rather protect that person's right to be born,
Mm,
if I can use the language that you hear people using.
sure, sure.
That I think is different from a culture where people really want to push an outright abortion ban. In Iowa, on the ground, there's a lot of support for limited abortion rights across the aisle, including protections in the case of medical need.
Right, right. Yeah, and you know, practically speaking, it's going to be very different here versus someone, you know, in Central Texas who they can't get anywhere else they to get the medical care that they need. Here in Iowa, we're not too far from Minnesota, we're not too far from Illinois. There are practical options for people. You know, we're speaking quietly here, obviously, but these are the things that people consider.
Looking at where is abortion protected in the state constitution, we see that in both Minnesota and in Illinois. I don't think that we'll see that level of protection emerge in Iowa because of the level of social contentiousness on the ground.
No, I can't imagine it happening. But you know, I mean, we have good interstates here.
I'm just trying to say, what is the tone on the ground? The tone on the ground, I don't think is like a anti-woman tone. I think it's a tone that's concerned about children and is concerned about women's medical well-being.
Yeah,
And that it would be nice if we could leave this matter between women and their doctors, but it's become such a trigger point political issue.
yeah. That would be nice, but you know, the politics, I agree. It's not so much about any sort of hypothetical, you know, like the is an embryo have rights, all these sort of things that have been in the news lately. It's much more about just liking babies.
They really like
Oh
babies.
yeah.
And it's,
We know from experience.
I don't know. I feel like these are important cultural notes. If you're a person who would consider moving here, the fact that I can't speak so well for South Dakota because I haven't spent much time there. I can say that South Dakota has the strongest climate outlook overall of the three states, but it looks like it might be more closed socially from these legal frameworks. And I do get that impression from people I hear about in South Dakota.
Yeah, yeah.
But as far as I know, there are only 4 people who live in South Dakota. So I haven't gotten that much information out of them, right?
Yeah, they're fine. They're good people.
Sort of culturally contiguous southern Minnesota, northern Iowa thing. And I say that, and I know that's making everyone in Minnesota mad.
Oh yeah.
I kind of like that. In this a relatively contiguous cultural area with the serious hot dish casserole divide taken into account, I think that you would not find this to be an area where most people are motivated by hate. I think that you would find most responses to socially contentious issues on the ground to be driven by concern. And the impression that I get is that that's very different from the energy on the ground in other regions of the country.
I would say so too. And then, you know, it's part of a bigger issue also, which is access to healthcare in general in rural areas isn't as strong as it ought to be. You know, we live what, an hour from a decent hospital. There are people who live much further even. And you know, these can be issues when it comes to women's reproductive health. And also just in general, people struggle to get access to healthcare in rural America.
It is true. I think that when we're talking about healthcare, it's worth looking not only at this legal framework, but what kind of access is there related to like Medicaid expansion? What kind of access is there to trauma services, to disability rights? And if there's interest in it, we can share more about that in the weeks to come as people think, would I want to relocate to a region where no one ever went on vacation? It's an intense question.
Where is that?
No one comes here on vacation,
Oh,
man.
to vacation here. I was gonna say we could go on vacation.
We're allowed to leave.
Well, we leave.
We're allowed
Yeah.
to leave.
We're gonna go to Alabama.
It's true. We are going to Alabama. We want to go and look at this area where the coastline is going to shift very dramatically by Gulf Shores. It's going to shift definitely, no matter what scenario, by 2050. It's interesting to look at a place that's going to experience intense change and look at how that might provide an opportunity landscape. we're getting off topic here. I think that it's worth talking about cultural and social issues when we talk about climate destinations, when we talk about these big decisions that impact your lives. I hope that you feel safe asking more questions about this if you're interested. And I hope we've been able to provide you with some decent information, a little view into a part of the world where there's really not a lot of information moving in and out.
Yes, and I'd add to that that if these are issues that concern you, if you're upset by some of the things you've been seeing on the news lately, you're not the only one, and you're not the only one here who feels that way. And we would love to have you here and help fight the good fight.
It's true. There's a lot of people who care, and there's a reason why Iowa has been a profound swing state. Part of it is that many of us here are nuts. The other part of it is that there are many people of diverse viewpoints in this state who get activated over different issues from time to time. There has been very limited population movement from when Iowa was blue
Mhm.
to when Iowa is red right now.
It's true.
all about action and organizing.
It's true.
And this is a place where I think it's unique that people who disagree can have conversations, can be civil, can help each other, can be good neighbors. And I have a deep value for our neighbors who think and feel differently from us. I have good
Oh, yeah.
relationships with many people who would have very different views on these issues from
Yeah,
me.
absolutely.
I think it's a real strength of the region. That and the ducks. Thanks for joining us. Folks, thanks for watching and thanks for joining us. AR has recently passed a milestone. We've reached more than 100,000 people in America with detailed local climate information, and it's thanks to the incredible support of the AR community. There are so many folks committing their financial resources, their energy, their time to helping this information get out there. I'm so grateful to all of you, and I'm so glad that we're doing this together. Thanks for being there with me. I'm going to keep an eye on the news. I'm going to keep an eye on high consensus science. I'm going to try and get you what you need as we go through this together.